citizenship, a critical commonality they share is this matter of allegiance, the idea of belonging by right to a specific place. In countries where citizenship is prized, it is usually not a question of benefit, but a question of history. In other words, a connection between the individual and the history of the state is critical in cementing the bond of citizenship. This may be the most important reason that history is taught to children around the world. The byproduct of this teaching is that in addition to understanding the place of their country in the world, children begin to acquire an appreciation for their place in that country. Essentially, citizens up to participate in governance. Our children must feel ownership of this country. Other ways in which government can facilitate citizen participantship all revolve around the word access, right? So we talk about access to participate in public decisions. A government with a desire to encourage citizens to participate in governance must create the avenues for citizens to access policymakers and legislators with their views and ideas. What is that mechanism that allows the public to inform the government? Citizens, and let me say this, and citizens must be responsible and active participants. Another part of access is access to information. So a government must show and tell when civil society inputs has influence, their voices should be shown. It is the role of civil society, though, where it is different. And civil society is not the government. Civil society must be content to accept their responsibility as advisors to government, albeit influence or influential advisors with the credentials to support their advice. Again, in order to facilitate citizen participation, civil society or civil society organizations must be broad and inclusive in their research and development of public policy recommendations. They must be adamant in canvassing the widest possible pool of citizens with experience relevant to the policy question at hand. And canvass support, even if the majority of those are not in support of that question. Essentially, what we must make sure that we do is that we create a mechanism or a way to where even some may call our outliers among us have a chance to affect government policy as well. So those are just some thoughts that I have about how we can participate. And I thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts, and I am excited to really get into the discussion of participation. Thank you.
I think that as we go on, as excited as we are to talk about the prospects that lie within this space, more and more we'll understand the true importance of all of these points that are being made and the change that can actually happen. But to keep moving along, I'm going to welcome Dr. Hamilton to come and share with us his presentation. So let's welcome him as he comes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Protocol having been established, we're going to move right into this presentation, and I'm going to try to stick to the script. That's important, that we maximize our time. The discussion is going to be very critical for the interaction. I'd like to tell you that Civil Society Bahamas is the apex body for civil society organizations for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Simply put, it's the umbrella organization for civil society organizations of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. In the next slide, we recognize the importance of people. People are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, demanding three things: protection, provisions, and preparation. As I crafted that, I thought of the PPPs, public-private partnerships. This is the crux of it in civil society with regard to protection, provisions, and preparation. As we move to the next slide. Vision to legacy, taking responsibility. Our forefathers and foremothers had a vision for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and expectations of both the citizenry and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. 48 years later, behind independence, as we became an independent nation on the 10th of July 1973, and we're now into 2021, 48 years later. As we continue, the preamble of our Constitution is of paramount importance as we reflect on the civil society sector at large. The preamble of the Constitution, I'm just going to speak to some aspects of this, emphasizing who is a Bahamian. When we look at the preamble of our Constitution, there's some serious things that come forward in the preamble of our Constitution, and it begs, with regard to 48 years later, as an independent nation, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Those in purple, I want to emphasize rediscovery, people of this family of islands, a national commitment, family islands, and fundamental rights and freedoms. We can take the next slide. As we move over, I'll emphasize in this one, establishment of a free and democratic sovereign nation founded on spiritual values. Our next emphasis would be labor and lives, ultimately indivisible unity. As we continue, the role of civil society, and this is very critical, as previous presenter made representation, I want to undergird that representation with this. The role of civil society, which is speaking to individuals and organizations, has been widely recognized as an essential third sector. Its strength can have a positive influence on the state and the market. Civil society is therefore seen as an increasingly important agent for promoting good governance, like transparency, effectiveness, openness, responsiveness, and accountability through NGOs and CSOs as gatekeepers. I want you to hang on to that last tag, gatekeepers. We can move to the next slide. In this diagram here, Civil Society Bahamas tripartite governance system, it's speaking to what I refer to as two bites at the cherry. And you notice that there are three circles there with smaller circles on the outskirts. And it's speaking specifically to the center of this would be, as we recognized earlier, people being the most important asset and investments. Civil society, that blue section, is speaking to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And when we speak to the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we're speaking about inclusion, we're speaking of consultation, and this is very critical because the citizenry are voters and taxpayers. Very, very important. Voters and taxpayers. As we move to the next circle, we're speaking to the business community, and the business community, it flips, taxpayers and voters. Then we go to the third circle, which is speaking to government, who are the tax collectors and dispensers of the tax. Finally, we go to the outside and we're speaking to CSOs, NGOs, which is used interchangeably with regard to non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations. On the outskirts, this is the second bite of the cherry as gatekeepers, because what is happening here, delegated responsibility has been given to the government with regard to governance of the nation, but there's accountability that's necessary from the citizenry, having delegated that authority to the government to execute in the best interests of the citizenry. We can slide over to our next slide. In the next slide, as we address the technical aspects of this, we move to, this is another powerful thing here, empowerment, speaking to equality and equity. What we're speaking to here, as a matter of fact, we can also incorporate availability, accessibility, and affordability. And when we speak to this, we speak into civil society organizations, which is the acronym CSOs, the non-governmental organizations as NGOs, faith-based organizations as FBOs, and not-for-profit organizations, NPOs. And they're all very important in this unique and significant right as we move forward, upward, onward together to 50 years later, which is ahead of us. And it's important that we begin this process now, having acknowledged that we're 48 years later, but we're moving steadily towards our 50th. And in speaking to this context that we're dealing with here, it's important that we have something to celebrate when we arrive at our 50th anniversary. It's a very, very serious thing. And each of us have a role to play in that as individuals, each of us being unique. There's a very unique contribution that each of us can make. So the potential is there, but we must make good on that potential by taking responsibility, individual responsibility. Then we encourage our family members to do likewise. Further, we encourage the faith-based community to do likewise. And then we move to the nation, we move to the region, and we go to the world. Two of our Olympic athletes and former Olympic athletes have demonstrated that we do have the potential, we do have the capability, we do have the ability, and we can do this. Shawnee and Mr. Gardner recently demonstrated at the top. I think the same way that they've been able to speak to the world, we likewise, as we heard earlier this morning, speaking of some of the things that we can take charge of, we can also speak to the world and be a template for other parts of the world to follow and emulate. Let's move to the next slide. As we move here, we're speaking to who is a Bahamian, all right? This is very important, speaking to who is a Bahamian, speaking to vision, legacy, that's the one slide over. Who is a Bahamian? Vision to legacy, taking responsibility. That critically important question from the preamble of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, who is a Bahamian? Therefore, I thought to provide a definition as follows. An individual or individuals who demonstrate the spirit of unity with Bahamian values and practices the principles of the spiritual, socioeconomic, and cultural identification of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, wherever they are found in the world. And believe you me, if you were to take stock, you'd recognize that we have Bahamians in many other countries around the world that are making significant contributions. Significant contributions. They are out of the country for numerous reasons. Many of them the desire to be back in the country making contributions. We're here and we are obligated likewise to make the contributions as Bahamians. As we move further, I want to expand this with regard to our responsibilities and being accountable as Bahamians. And there are two focuses here, failure and good success. There are three sins of failure, and there are three blessings of good success. And we're going to drill down a bit. The three sins of failure are selfishness, unfairness, and injustices. Further, the three sins of failure is translated as follows: corruption, conspiracy, and cultural contamination. The three blessings of good success are selflessness, fairness, and justice. Drilling down further, the three blessings of good success is translated as follows: purity, integrity, and cultural excellence. In essence, what we're simply saying, we all have the potential, we all have the opportunities to step up with regard to excellence as citizens and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we have a responsibility to truly engage and execute that responsibility. Next slide for me. In this frame, we're speaking to re-emphasizing again that people are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, back to the protection, provisions, and preparation. And of paramount importance is the indivisible unity. We must be in agreement, all right? Reference is made to the National Development Plan earlier, and that's a centerpiece that brings focus and allows us to be able to chart our course going in a particular direction together and being able to assess. In business, we speak to planning, organizing, implementing, but we must also evaluate to determine whether we're on target, off target, whether we achieved, how do we achieve, and can we improve the achievement? And that's something that every Bahamian has a responsibility to seek to make their contribution as far as the nation is concerned. As we speak to protection, the preamble, protecting what? The preamble of the Constitution and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is important. We heard reference to rule of law. The primary rule with regard to the nation is found in our Constitution. Provisions, the identified national resources of the Bahamas. And thirdly, preparation, intentional and sustained re-education, training and development opportunities for Bahamians. And this speaks to the agreement of a covenant or a social contract for Bahamians. It's very important that we have our vision laid out for us with good interpretation, understanding, as we referenced earlier. Our forefathers had a vision for this nation, for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Equally as they had a vision for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, they also had expectations of each of us as citizens and residents of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we need to get reacquainted with it as we move forward. Next slide. We spoke in our first frame in regard to people are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. In this case, demanding generational protection, provisions, and preparation. Very, very important that we're able to understand the vision, understand the mission, and to be able to communicate that cross-generationally. Citizens and civil society participation. This is the heart of it. People are the most important assets and investments of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for this opportunity to share that information with you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hamilton. We are gonna keep it moving to give us as much time as possible toward the end. So I'm gonna call on Nikita Shiorul to come and share her presentation. So let us welcome her as she comes.
Hello, how is everyone doing today? It truly is a pleasure to be here, standing on protocol that has already been established. My name is Eagle Ray Empress. You can call me Nikita. I'm very, very happy to be part of this conversation and to be with you here in Nassau in person, in real human experience for those of us who are in the room, and in virtual experience for those of you who are joining us in Zoom land and beyond. So I'm talking today as the founder and CEO of YME Bahamas and the Cat Island Conservation Institute. And the vision for YME Bahamas is a world where coastal communities are prosperous, safe, and respectfully living in harmony with nature. And that picture is Orange Creek. And that's just a Tuesday on Orange Creek, Cat Island. And we do really live in a magical island in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Slide. And I put the premise that org sent out prior to this conversation as I was reflecting on, well, what am I going to talk about? And I just want to read this out again. I know Stefan mentioned it earlier. Civil society involvement in the development and enactment of policy is globally recognized as a critical vehicle to ensure that governments gain stakeholder input and buy-in. However, in the Bahamas, there remains a gap in the relationship between civil society, citizens, and government. How can citizens be set up for successful participation in governance, and what role can government and civil society organizations play to this end? Slide. And so my first question that came to mind reflecting on that was, what are we governing for? Do we all know that? Is there a collective shared vision? I think sometimes it's very easy for us to be so laser focused in the details that we forget where we're going, that we don't realize that we're going in circles. Next slide. The second question is, what is our shared vision? And are all the beneficiaries of this vision aware of the vision? Because sometimes some of us have a really good vision, but Tim, Susan, and Jan, they just don't know. Right? And so we need to make sure that we all actually know where we're going, what we're governing for, and that we have a shared vision. Great. Awesome. So this brings me to the mission of the work of YME Bahamas and the Cat Island Conservation Institute. And this is to inspire coastal communities to actively participate in the conservation of their environment and resources through community projects, research, education, and sustainability stewardship that honors Indigenous and ancient wisdom. Now, this depends on innovation and an educational paradigm shift. And I really believe why we're here today is all about fostering the development of SDG 17 through strategic and local, national, regional, and global partnerships. We're going to be able to advance our collective vision. And that's really to see thriving communities. And ultimately for us, the reality is it's thriving climate resilient communities, because we just have to be real. We have one main threat, and that's climate change. And everything, whether you're in health or you're in social services or you're in the environment looking at snakes, it all falls under climate change. And so that's really cool because it makes it easy for us to align our vision towards a common goal. Then we can have a shared vision and a shared story. That's what's up. So this takes me to the approach of how we do our work at the Cat Island Conservation Institute. And so for those who would remember, the Cat Island Conservation Institute was a call to action that came out immediately after Hurricane Dorian, where we realized like we weren't doing enough as a nation, and we needed to bring brilliant minds together from a cross section of society to make it make sense, because we needed more voices in the room talking about the problems and the solutions collectively. And so this results in a climate resilient Bahamas requires what I like to say are two main things. One is evidence-based adaptive management. We have to be making informed decisions. We have to know what we've done. We have to be knowing where we're going, and we need to be tracking ourselves along the way, because if we're not headed in the right direction, and if we are going in circles, we're going to have some serious problems. And we also have to educate people for the climate solutions that we want, right? And so that means there has to be a radical change, because how we've been doing it has not and will not be preparing us for where we need to go. Change can sometimes be uncomfortable because we're stepping into the unknown, and our brains can't process, because our brains can only process what has been our lived experiences. Our brains and our nervous system can't calculate for what we don't know. And so this is where we get to have a positive belief in the future that we're co-creating, that it's going to be better, that yes, it's going to change and there's going to be growing pains, but it's going to take us into a better position tomorrow than where we are today. And so for me, as a scientist, slide please, the foundation for this is really closing what I like to call the policy science society feedback loop. Ultimately, the people who are making policy need to know what's going on. They need to have access to the latest information so that they can make the best decisions. Because honestly, we don't have time and there's only so much money. So we don't want to waste the money that we do have on decisions that just don't make sense for anyone. And this is a big factor as we're moving into now understanding loss and damages, understanding how do we prepare our communities. What we need, though, to be able to fill those gaps, to be able to adapt to that is data, is science, right? Because if you don't have the data, well, then we're just all guessing and we might as well just go hang out on the beach, you know? But of course, we know science, technology, innovation has not been a priority, not only for our government, but for the region. Our region is so underfunded as it relates to our investment in education and how that translates to science, technology, and innovation. And this is critically important because science is the driver of our economy. It's the drivers of development. And so for us to be able to tap in, to be able to create the societies that we want, that are equitable, that are fair, that are just, we need to ensure that our people have access to not only the knowledge, but the resources. Because I can have a lot of knowledge in my head, but if I don't have a boat, I can't do much coral research, right? So it's just like there are steps to this. And it's okay that we're not where we want to be, but we have to know how to get there. And ultimately, then this follows down to the last section, which is society and understanding the well-being and that. And Stefan mentioned it earlier when he brought up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have a society, we have a country who are operating in chronic crisis mode, right? And so when you're in crisis mode and you're thinking about this hour, let alone dinner, I can't come to you and have a conversation to say, please, sir, sit down and have a conversation about these big words you probably don't understand because you probably have a leaving certificate. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that is where we are. And we have to acknowledge where we are and help people so we leave no one behind. There is no shame in not being where we want to be, but there is a problem if we don't pause, look back and be like, okay, homie, you're over there. I'm gonna need you to get over here. What do we need to do? Let me stop and help you out. And that helping out looks like very different things in very different ways for our country. And so bringing it back to the topic of governance, slide. I am hosting a fisheries conversation in Cat Island once. I was asking fishers and community members to vision what would be the ideal, marine ecosystem for us. And one of the fishers, he was like, when all you see is darkness, you can't imagine a light. And that's when I realized the ability to vision a future is a privilege. Because you're not worrying about your here and now if you can be dreaming about 20 years from now, okay? So we have to be gentle with our people and we get to go slowly because we all deserve to be part of living a thriving life, benefiting from the beauty that surrounds us. And in order to achieve that, there are certain steps that are required. So my question to you is, how do we inspire and enable people in darkness to equitably engage in good governance? So 2 points to this. First, we have institutional capacity. Slide. So one of the greatest ways that we're going to improve our ability as a nation to govern, to engage more people into these conversations that are more complex, that are more long-term, is ensuring that our institutions, both private and public, have the capacity, the long-term capacity, because there are little gaps in the system. And when there's gaps in the system, they end up creating massive potholes at the end of the day. And then now you have your tire stuck in the pothole, you can't get anywhere. All right, so we have to really be intentional about building our institutional capacity, both at a governmental level, but also at our small CSO NGO level. And this is something that I have painstakingly been working on for the past 3 years, because governance is really complex. And when I established Young Marine Explorers 15 years ago, there wasn't a nonprofit act, so that the governance structures weren't in place. And so I had to learn a lot of things the hard way, which I know so many other organizations have been stumbling through this process of even setting up the business side that enables you as a CSO or a nonprofit organization to then execute your activities that you really want to do. And so understanding these two sides are very important. And I think, next slide, please. One of the most important that came up earlier is also that we have to heal from our colonial wounding. Colonial wounding is a phrase that I learned this past couple of months as I've been studying the Caribbean and our challenges and how we move forward. And the reality is that in the region, in the Bahamas, we have at least 400 plus years of psychosocial trauma that is instilled in all of our bodies and our beings, okay? In addition to the fact that we have not been equipped with skills, with resources, with, next slide, please, equitable education to be able to navigate our way out of this situation. So the healing that is required is not just us having conversations about how our history has shaped where we are today, but also taking the time to help young men learn that it's safe to cry, it's safe to feel and express their emotions. Right? That violence does not have to be the first answer. But if you don't know what you don't know, and that goes for everyone. And so we need to help people know what they don't know and to see where the opportunities lie for us to create a new collective future. So with that being said, I want to share some of the ways that I'm working to help engage communities in policymaking in Cat Island. Next slide, please. So we offered a Blue Business Fellowship. It started last year. And this is part of, again, if you don't have the know-how, if you didn't graduate from high school, you don't have access to the technology, and you're working in a service industry job where you just can't. You go to work, you keep your head down, you do what you got to do, you got to go home because you've got children. If there's no break in that cycle, and if there's no one stepping in to show you an alternative, well, we're going to keep doing the same thing that we've been doing. So what we offered, this was our very first Blue Business Fellowship, and it gave our fellow Anthony's Anthon a cell phone, an iPhone Pro, and social media training, training in ocean communication, and a number of other skills development so that Anthony's had a fighting chance to at least be able to step into the opportunities that exist. Because if you don't have a good phone, you can't zoom in. Zoom only works on pretty high level phones. A lot of Bahamians don't have phones that they can access Zoom on, right? These are barriers to equitable access to participation, and they are critical foundations that we need to be able to meet. But not only was this fellowship providing technology, it also provided skills where Antonice was trained to lead, and she's now co-designing a citizen science project in Cat Island on how we improve the hydrometric data network. So that's a very big phrase. Let me break that down for a minute. Okay, so our Department of Meteorology needs to understand rainfall because as a nation, we're a water scarce country. Water is really important, not just for us to drink, for everything, whether it's health, food, you name it, water is our lifeblood. However, there's a lot that we don't know. And so in 2020, when this map was taken, there were only 8 data points throughout the country recording rainfall. Now, we all know it can be raining in Arthurstown, Cat Island, and Dumfries, 10 minutes away, it's dry as ever. right? That's because in the Bahamas, we have what we call convective rain patterns. But if we don't know how it rains, where it rains, and if our government has really amazing technology gifted to us by various nations that requires us understanding where it's raining around the country to be able to calibrate the radar, to be able to inform and make better decisions and understanding weather patterns and hurricanes projections. If we don't have that information, we can't make good decisions. So what's really cool is part of this Blue Business Fellowship is that Antonise is leading a team of Cat Islanders in expanding this. So we now, when we had 0, as of before COP26, there were 0 rain gauges recording data. We now have 2 added to the island. And now we're gonna have Antonise's first employed task post her fellowship is to design a plan to expand it by 5. Right, so that's 5 new rain gauges in the community. But not only is that significant, is now Antonise and our community members get to learn about reading a rain gauge and the science of rain and the water cycle and how that connects to climate change. And all of a sudden, climate change is relevant because, oh, the rain that I use to bathe, oh, now I know when it rains because I don't actually have potable water, right? Because there's no piped water. But understanding when it rains and how it rains can help a person at an individual level make better decisions and also help the government get a lot of information that they really need for us to be able to survive and thrive. Next slide. But of course, we all know often science and business isn't really the best entry point for Bahamians because ain't nobody got time for that because I didn't finish school and I wasn't paying attention to math class because, you know, money got to make sometimes. So there are other ways that we get to connect with people. And this is the power of heritage, not just the heritage of understanding and learning this plat, but understanding that this plat system goes beyond the shores of our island and takes us back to the continent of Africa. Knowing that according to the African Union, as members of the diaspora, we make up the 6th region of the African Union. So our story goes beyond our shores, and it is our birthright to know that, because knowing our history informs where we get to go. Next slide, please. So with that being said, we had an amazing virtual party. It's called the Grouper School Party. There's going to be another one coming up probably sometime next month. This is now our 3rd iteration of it. This will be our 3rd iteration. But the Grouper School Party is a way of engaging our global community. So in this picture, we have people from London, from Ethiopia, from the Gambia, from Arthurstown, Cat Island, from Baintown, places in the United States and Canada. And we were building and co-creating a community around culture and heritage, where we can hold each other accountable and responsible to the climate action that's required. Because until we as islanders understand the realities of people who live in the mountains, and the people in the mountains understand our reality, solving a global problem is just not going to happen. You have to be a global community to solve a global problem. So from the heart of Cat Island, we're working on solving a global problem. One of the first ones is, as you can see at the top here, that's the rain gauge. That was the first rain gauge that was installed in Cat Island, as we are moving together to increase our understanding and with data, so we have more information that can be put into the government system. So now, engaging in policy becomes more tangible. Next slide, please. So we have a shared vision. And this is, right now, we are working with the Bahamas National Commission for UNESCO to see, in phase 1 of a project, to see if Cat Island could be recognized as a UNESCO Global Man and Biosphere Reserve. This is really exciting for a number of reasons. Is that one, it centers humans at the heart of protecting, right? So yes, it's the biodiversity. So we're going to save the snakes and the coral reefs, right? But also it's a reminder that the people are at the heartbeat of the island as well. And when we understand the people's needs, when we take our time, and sometimes it means going very slowly, because I've had to get my team onto email, and sometimes I have to text, I have to call, I have to tell someone to drive to the store to tell someone to check your email, please, because I need you to respond. But like, that's what it means when we leave no one behind, is that we actually do what we need to do to make sure that someone gets to read the email when that's not part of their daily life because they work in the farm, So how we get to adapt, next slide, please, and ultimately all of this that I shared today takes me back to what I have been fighting for, is how do we protect our oceans? How do we ensure that Bahamians actually get to tap into the resources that we have, not only to drive the development of a blue economy and a sustainable blue economy that is economically benefiting Bahamians, but also that we get to remain on these islands. Right? Because otherwise, if we don't change, people are going to have to leave. And it's going to go either by choice or by force. And depending on how much money you have access to, and the passports that you may or may not hold, will determine where you get to go and what your quality of life is. And so going back to the very beginning, for me, and the work with Wyoming, Bahamas, and the Cat Island Conservation Institute, it's all about how do we ensure that every single Bahamian gets to live a prosperous, thriving life. And that's where we get to pause, back up a little bit, and then walk forward together, making sure that we just take the time and develop the patience required to do things a little bit slowly. And so what we have been slowly working on is certifying, is a trade for us, certified community marine scientists. So the vision that we're working towards is being able to see Cat Islanders and other Bahamians certified in new trades as it relates to the ocean, and ensuring then the infrastructure is in place so that not only we have the skills, but now we have a way for communities to actually engage with university students, with the wider world on these topics that everyone is flocking to our country for, to study, to learn, but yet because of our colonial wounding, we haven't yet had the opportunity to truly take advantage of that. And so with that being said, climate action, next slide. So another very tangible way, and I want to celebrate the government of the Bahamas for their commitment to climate action, is that this picture on the left was taken at COP26 with a team from the Caribbean and University of Edinburgh. And my question to you is, what can you do to show your ocean love? And one of the things that our government of the Bahamas is doing to show ocean love and to spread ocean love is that in July, we will be hosting, I say we because Wyoming Bahamas is helping in the design of the program of this. We will be hosting a regional conference of youth, where youth from the region and youth from the Family Islands and youth from New Providence, 200, 300 youth are going to come together, and for 2 days, we are going to understand and explore what climate change means for us, design a shared vision for the use of the region, and let that guide us as we then get to support and step into some of the higher level policy spaces at COP27, which of course will be in Egypt and beyond. So we get to hold a vision, create a vision. We talked about the National Development Plan slide, thank you. We talked about the National Development Plan, and it's so important that we have a vision, but the thing is, who's holding the vision? And if our youth, when our youth are the ones who are holding the vision and running with the vision, whether they are in government or they're in the private sector or the civil society, if they created that vision, they will be part of amending it as visions evolve, but they will be invested in it. And I believe this is at the heart of including engaging all of our citizenry into the policy cycle. It has to be an iterative process. And with that being said, I always finish a presentation with a word. I like to teach a word. I'm learning Amharic. Amharic is one of the Ethiopian languages. And I do this because there's so much knowledge out there in the world that we don't know because we don't speak that language, and it's our history and it's our heritage. And so the more that we get to learn, this is Miskana, it means gratitude, the more we get rooted into the direction that we want to go. And so with that, thank you so much for listening and taking the time to be with us today.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Nikita. So we are a little short on time, but I will try to quickly, if anyone has one or two burning questions for any of our panelists, to take them. But one of the things I want to quickly point out is that as we talk about the role of civil society in the development of policy that is inclusive and representative of the needs of citizens, I think that these presentations have made it very clear that the role is truly important. And I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind as we move forward. Samantha Rowe's presentation speaking to an initiative that I think is so greatly responsive to the actual needs of people, and it shows in all of them many successes. Dr. Hamilton speaking to the standards of civil society and the importance of our role right down to our core values as a nation. And of course, Nikita's presentation highlighting the power of NGOs and civil society organizations to address issues at all levels. So we don't try to start at the top of the pyramid when people are still struggling at the bottom. But at this time, if there are any burning questions that we could quickly answer, we'll take those and wrap up for lunch. Sorry, I want.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Williams, representing Uplifting Men's Ministry and Prison Fellowship, Bahamas. But I have 3 questions, quickly, 3 case study for Ms. Samantha Rowe. I know we'll be able to get together afterwards, but I just want to present 3 cases. And this just happened this week. Case number 1, individual applied for support from the Access Accelerator. The individual had a business plan drawn up by someone. The plan was rejected and directed to somebody else. But the first person who drew up the plan now sits on the board of the Access Accelerator. That's case number 1. Case number 2, because we're talking public policy, right? We're talking public policy. Case number 2, the individual applying for support from the Small Business Access Accelerator, he or she, and these are real cases just this week, he or she does not have funding. And so now they have to choose from a list of 3 individuals. Access Accelerator gives a voucher of $500. And that individual now have to find the additional $700, which they don't have. And case number 3, public policy again. The individual says, why not make it a policy that if you're applying for support from the Access Accelerator, why not from the break give them a list of persons who they could choose from to avoid spending from one person, rejected, now they got to find money to go to a 3rd person. So that's just those 3 cases, okay?
I can do it in general. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your case studies. What I would appreciate, though, is because we're limited on time, if you and I can speak individually, because every case is different, right? And there may be some other details that's not fully disclosed in your quick description of each case. Is that fair? Okay. So overall, Access Accelerator provides, as I had mentioned before, business advisory services. And part of that is to help each individual or business, whether it's startup or existing, with crafting and shaping their concept, idea, in order to start or expand their business. And that requires a plan, a vision. How do you craft and shape your vision for that business? Now, we provide services through our business plan writer program. At first, we used to do that ourselves. And of course, with unfortunately, whether it's government agencies or even NGOs, resources are limited considering the amount of services that are needed for our people. So we do subsidize through our business plan or business plan writer program up to a certain amount to assist those persons who want to augment, who wants to create, who wants to expand their business plan in order to get the level of access funding that we provide. Outside of that, we provide additional programs, and it may be specific in different areas. For example, we're currently crafting with some partners a Blue Economy Accelerator. We currently have the Royal Caribbean program open, and that's towards the tourism industry with New Providence, Berry Islands, and Grand Bahama. So there's different scenarios and opportunities that are available for startups as well as existing businesses. But I'll be more than happy to address each case study with you after the session.
Before we go, Erin Brown, it would be remiss of us not to hear from you because I think you bring a very valuable perspective to this sort of conversation. And then we are good for lunch, I promise.
I'm gonna make it good. I'm gonna make it good. And so my question, well, it's kind of across the board, but specifically when we're talking about access, I enjoyed each of your presentations because access and inclusion is very important, but it's also intersectional. And we have been very successful at providing access and inclusion and opportunities for non-disabled persons. And so SBDC, it's interesting for me is we're having all of these trainings, these fundings, these programs, but yet it's still inaccessible for persons with disabilities. And that's very concerning. And when you spoke about the children and the students, once again, students with disabilities are not included in that. And so if we're going to be very intentional, if we're going to truly have this inclusivity discussion, we need to now implement what I love about what you spoke. I'm ready to come to Cat Island and I'm ready to bring a crew, because what I find in engagement, and especially the adaptive management part of it and the data, I would love us to have more traveling of our youth. And then once again, I'm going to say our youth with disabilities, I did a conference, a primary school conference. And from that age, there was an integration of non-disabled students and children with disabilities. And I asked, what would they want to be? And the children with disabilities had no idea because they were told they don't have a right to have an idea. And I mean, the response was literally, there's nothing for me to do. I live with a disability. I have a disability. We must change that. We all can change that, whether it is with engagement, whether it is re-looking at, re-evaluating the spaces that you hold and see where are the gaps of access that exist. Start there and don't be ashamed about it. Admit that, okay, this is an issue because it's a barrier that is killing us every day and that are causing a population of people who are valuable in sustainability, creativity, innovation, nation building, who has not had full access, inclusion, or opportunities to create a diverse Bahamas.